All right.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. This is episode 1 of our Fireside Chats. I am your co-host, Eric Neer. I'm the Director of Business Development with Block Clinical, and I'm here along with Zach Carr, CEO and co-founder of Block Clinical. So we came up with this idea with the goal of having a podcast-like discussion to enlighten, tackle tough topics, and not maybe this specific episode, but today we'll have a casual and open conversation, unscripted. The agenda basically is going to be the bulk of the conversation about our experience recently, or my experience recently at Patients as Partners, which was a great conference. It was up in Boston last week. We'll end up with a discussion around new articles that caught our eye over the past week as well. Some of the topics that we've heard, on some of the links on LinkedIn and some of the other industry feedback that we've gotten. And then what's next? We do have a conference next week, which is OCT, Outsourcing Clinical Trials Southeast, which is in Raleigh, North Carolina, my hometown. So with that, I will introduce Zach and let him say a few things about himself, and then we'll start the conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Looking forward to this adventure. We'll see how it goes. Zach Carr, one of the co-founders here at Block Clinical. Really think just probably quick about our background, right? We've worked together for how many years?
About 14, 15 years now. Yeah.
14, 15 years. Our previous experience was in patient concierge support. I think really before it was a thing. We were lucky enough to have a client that had a problem, and that problem was moving patients around the world into very niche research sites that could handle these patients. And with that, really, we operationally built out what we believe was probably the first model for patient support. Worked on that for 7, 8, 9 years before we decided that there was probably something better to be had. And in 2018, we founded Block Clinical. And our approach is, I think a little bit different than what's out there. Certainly, we wanted to create some software and enable our service to be better and more effective and really more scalable in the long term. So I think with that, that's really where we can start. And like you said today, let's talk about the conference you were at last week. And I think this next section, I will probably try and lead and just kind of ask you how it went and go from there.
Sure. No, I think that's a perfect segue. What was really in our past experience prior to Block Clinical was really centered around rare disease patients. And it was right at the same time when patient centricity started to emerge as the buzzwords in the industry. And so we had a solution at the right time. And so it really took off for us. But getting back to Patients as Partners, really it was all about including the patients. There was a lot of topics discussed. It was all about, embedding patient advocacy into the corporate DNA of these large organizations as well as the small ones. I think that the smaller companies, based on our experience, have been a lot more adaptive to the idea of, that proactive patient support. The larger companies are making a big effort, but bureaucracies in those instances, typically if there is a patient support portion of a very large corporate company, it's a small niche. And so what we wanted to do in the very beginning was to make it, applicable across the board. And that's really what the topics were at Patients as Partners. It was including them in the conversations. And from that, there's a lot of different avenues that were discussed, a lot of different ways that patients are involved now, and really helping design trials. And that was what it was all really about.
So, we've heard this for a while now, bringing patients in, patient voice, helping patients design trials, right? Was there anything, in your opinion, was there anything new and innovative that came out of this, or is this more still kind of the same thing? We're still stuck in hey, these services are great, everybody should offer them, but yet somehow we're still talking about them 5 years later at conferences.
Well, I think one of the things that I heard as far as innovations, there's a few. There's one that I really liked and I can't remember the name of the company. I'll have to remember it before the end of this discussion, but they focused on pediatric studies, and they would give, the sites would have a multitude of different stuffed animals for them. And so the kids would get the stuffed animals, and then there's a QR code on it that's been pre-recorded for that particular trial. and then you go to the app and you scan it, and then basically the phone would talk kind of through the stuffed animal to explain to the child what they were going to experience, where things were going to be done on, whether it's a blood draw or whatever it might be. So it was a great and interactive way for pediatric patients to become a lot more vested in, or have a better understanding of their trial. So when it comes to things like that, that is, it kind of pushes it into, that more patient-centric approach. Yes. The other big thing that I heard a lot more of this time that I haven't really heard much in the past is really the involvement of caregivers. Understanding that, a cancer diagnosis is not only a financially devastating thing for a lot of families, it impacts caregivers just as much as the patients themselves. So the conversation really was around, inclusion with them as part of the clinical trials, and the design of the clinical trials really incorporating, or at least the budgets incorporating, that caregiver support.
It's interesting. I mean, I think when folks look into our industry, they think, or at least into what we do, which is very niche within clinical trials, it's patient travel, patient payments. But when we set forth, we think of it more broadly, like logistics, right? And there's always these ideas and these examples that we can't always come up with to explain why we've approached it in a certain way. And so if a patient enrolls and they need a stuffed animal, through a separate supplier that is not, it's kind of unique to the trial, that's where sort of our approach makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, you've got an onboarding process and we have to do specific things. It's very easy for us to add those suppliers and those vendors, in addition to the support for caregivers and travel and payment. So I think that's a great application, and understanding that these trials are going to always get more complex and continuously get more complex. It's not just travel, it's not just payments, it's going to be anything, any service that a patient might need once they enroll that a sponsor is willing to cover, right, from a cost perspective. So I
think, I heard an example that's kind of on point with that. I mean, when I'm outlining a scope of work, I always say up to, it's like up to, including but not limited to the scope of services, because there's so many nuanced things that come up. And there was one lady that I was speaking with, it was a patient that was saying that she has to get her drugs from a local compounding pharmacy. The closest one is an hour and a half away. So once every other week or once a week, she has to drive an hour and a half. The pharmacy can't deliver and they won't ship it. And so in that instance, that's where a concierge company could come in and basically send a car to go pick it up and deliver it to the house, perhaps.
We've done that. We've had clients that have asked us to do that, and we've been able to do that for patients. So absolutely, things in reverse, home health services, right? You've just got a lot of movement and logistics, and our business is not based on moving a patient to the site as much as you would think. Our business is based on making it as easy for the patient as possible. And if that means, facilitating home health companies and helping them get to the patient's home and getting kit deliveries, right? We do shipping of kits and storage, as you're well aware, and anything that, might make it easier. That's the goal here, right? From a patient services perspective, and then certainly from a site services perspective. What can we automate? What can we help? Make more efficient so that sites can do what they're supposed to do, which is collect data and, care for the patient once they get there.
On that note, I think, as a little sidebar, I think that it's interesting how, and I've had several conversations with the home health companies, how there's not more of an overlap and there's not more of a one hand shaking the other with companies like ourselves that do all the logistics for patients and we do all of that patient support. Having those conversations, there's still a firewall between, these services. And I think that as patient, support becomes more of an awareness, then there'll probably end up being more overlapping, but that needs to be driven by the corporate sponsors. They've got to be the ones that are going to, kind of put us together. If there's something that, one hand shakes the other, we can do that.
Well, you've got two companies that historically have vested interest in one or the other. It's either at home or it's at the clinic, right? Mm-hmm. Home health companies aren't making money if the patient goes to the site and so forth. Yet, what we all want, or what we should want, is patient choice. We want a patient to be able to say, "Hey, on visit 1, I don't want someone coming to my home. I want to go to the clinic." On patient, visit 3, I want someone to come to my home. So we need to be able to have, some piece of technology that can trigger based on that decision, and immediately sort of align all of the resources and suppliers and things that might be needed on that visit. And I think suppliers don't believe that's possible, at least not
Yeah.
from a financial perspective, because it could just get too complex and expensive. But the reality is, it is possible. You just need a conduit in there to sort of, just be the pipe, right? Like we're trying to be plumbers. So we're just trying to be the intel inside for clinical research and help oil and move data so that suppliers that are delivering these services for sites and patients get the data they need and can deliver these services. And then, yeah, in many cases, pay them, remit payment for, to patients, to sites, to suppliers, to whomever might have done this work. So you've kind of summed it up in a nutshell there. Let's, yeah, what else? Was there anything else from innovation that you could think of? Anything
I think
you
it
heard?
was all, I think it was kind of the usual suspects. The thing that I did enjoy about the conference was that it was more intimate. And so we had the opportunity to have conversations with the larger companies that a lot of times, if we're a smaller company, we get blocked out from. So having the, conversations with 3 of the top 5 biopharmas in the world was encouraging. And, to have interest, I think we were in a very empathetic environment for what we do for the purpose of that conference. So the people that I was speaking with really were looking for solutions. And I think that with our approach, it is an innovative solution. So if we're talking about innovation, we don't want to break our arms patting ourselves on our own backs, but, through integrations, I use some of the examples of what we've done in the past to automate some things. And so they were very receptive to that.
So was it only big companies? Like who showed up? And remind me, where was this conference?
It was in Boston, and so you had everybody from Johnson and Johnson to Alnylam Pharmaceuticals to much smaller biotechs. So it really ran the gamut of everybody. I mean, there was Jazz Pharmaceuticals, so Merck was there. You had Sanofi and Bristol Myers Squibb, but then you had a multitude of others. It wasn't very heavy CRO. It was very much more focused on much more focused on the biotechs themselves and their interaction with the patients, because a lot of it was about patients helping them design their clinical trials and that interaction directly with the end user. So it was not as much, heavy on, you had the large CROs like IQVIA was there and Parexel was there, but it wasn't really a heavy CRO presence, because I think that the whole idea was getting to that end user and allowing the patients to be part of the trial design. Everything from schedule of assessments to, regional support and companies like us and what we do.
It's nice hearing some of the old names from our old stomping ground. And, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't give Alnylam a shout, because if you remember, they were client uno, and they were wanting to build something that they knew could disrupt the industry, in a sense, could cause some costs, right? The idea that patients got supported for travel and payments, it was always happening. It's just, as a patient, you had to pay for it out of pocket. You had to book your own travel, and you had to seek reimbursement through an institution and, maybe get paid 60 days later. And to your point, when you've got a rare disease, you're already spending so much money out of pocket. That sort of burden is what they wanted to get rid of. And I think they were at the forefront, right? And I think they saw a tremendous success with their studies, like over enrolling in less amount of time than their competitors. And
they were beating their competition on, study timelines that started at the same time, or beating their timelines. And I think I did get the lady's attention when I said, I know that Alnylam is the name of the first star on Orion's belt. She was like, what? That's random. No one knows that except people that work at Alnylam. And I was like, well, there's a little history. So I had the opportunity to explain the history. And so there's some follow-ups there. So
no, it's good. I mean, they were always a great client. And so, all right, let's see here. And I don't know, any other vendors there? We have any competition there?
Mural Health was there, Mural was there for sure. And, but no one else. It was just us and them. And so they, I probably need to learn a little bit more about their platform and their approach and how they do it. But I had a good conversation with them. It's a giant pie out there, and in our space, we don't have a lot of competition compared to an EDC company where there's 50 to 100 EDCs, where in our space, we've got max 5. right?
Yeah,
So
let's talk about that a little later. I think when we get to the articles part, right, we
yeah.
can talk about kind of the giant gorilla and some of the things that are they're going on out there, and really see if it's talk about whether or not it's a benefit for clients
Yeah.
or tractor. But I don't know anything else. I know we unveiled a new booth, right? How'd that go?
It went really well. I think that what we had was some of our original design work, and it was a little beat up, a little tired. So we absolutely, and having two of them, the way they work together for both the site payments and the patient support, one booth, one pop-up banner played off of the other. We didn't do the full booth that we just got, but it was well received. And I think the message was a lot clearer than what we had before. So they could look at one of the banners and know exactly what that one meant. And then all of the support underneath of that one banner. And then the next one detailing what the other half of our business is. So it was like the two big buckets were right there. So it went really well. They displayed very well. So I was happy
It's
with it.
interesting. None of the well, that's great to hear, and I agree. I think the graphics and the presentations a lot is great. Are we going to do this conference again next year?
Yeah, I already signed up for it.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, it's interesting that it was sort of us and Ural and this basically the smaller guys at them, and I feel kind of like it's could be a reason for that. There's definitely other players in this space, but they're kind of tied up. They've either just bought someone, or they're working through mergers and acquisitions, or they're out there trying to sell themselves or
Mhm.
something. But yeah, just kind of interesting because you probably couldn't pick a conference that's more specific to patient services than
Yeah.
what we do, right? And so the big ones, yeah, they're great and all, but the reality is you sort of out there.
Well, I think it's also one of those things too, where we're so inundated, and a lot of times from my perspective, I mean, I get probably 20 emails a day inviting me to conferences. So DIA is coming up, which is a much larger conference. And obviously, the green fires of the world are absolutely going to be there, where we might not, because it's, used to be anyway, 10,000 of your closest friends, and you get stuck back in the corner. Meanwhile, they've got an acre-sized booth. And so it's kind of picking and choosing where you want to be. And I just think that there's so many conferences, but you're right. This one is so focused on, the core principle of what our company is built around to begin with, which is that patient support. So they missed out.
All right, my last question, I think, on this conference. Well, yeah, the folks that came to the booth from a service perspective, this was clearly a patient service focused trial, but are anyone talking site payments? Is anyone talking, what was everyone talking about?
Sure. I think that the one of the things that when we talk about really driving those patients and that patient retention is the biggest ROI that I think we bring to the table, and we can drive that even further because sites are ultimately an opt out on this service. If they're like, oh, we got a guy, or they do it on their own, or however the site is set up, there's a lot more adaptation if the services of site payments and patient support are combined, because the sites are interacting with us anyway. And while we're onboarding that site and we go through the patient support, they're a lot more apt to push the patients to us in order to support them, prepay for everything. And in that way, it's going to drive a lot more I think it impacts recruitment, because when their patients are coming to the sites and they're doing that screening, they say, if you choose to participate, this is how you'll be taken care of. They're a lot more apt to do that if we're communicating with them and working with them on the site payments anyway. So that's going to drive bigger retention numbers, because we can't impact a patient if we're not communicating with them or we don't touch them. And so sites, if they can opt out, really, well, I mean, maybe they can opt out for the services, but if we're paying them anyway, it's going to drive that return on investment and streamline processes a lot better overall. So when you look at sites that are, not to get into the whole site payments piece, but if we're driving site satisfaction and focused on patient satisfaction at the same time, there's so many benefits that cascade down from that.
Yeah, so I think actually I'm gonna swap our agenda slightly as we move into kind of the closing remarks here. But we had a client that we're working with right now, and they are paying these sites that they're working with a lot of money up front, like well more than a startup, way more than we would typically see sites get paid, and really just big retainers. And
Mhm.
we talked to the client, their feeling was that they want to keep the sites happy. Everyone says that. They want to be a partner with the site. But I think the comment that struck me, which I 100% agree with, and I can, just from looking at data, I can tell you that when you get the site's attention, a lot of these sites, they run many clinical trials. A lot of these clinical trials are very similar, both from inclusion and exclusion criteria, and they're looking for the same patients. And so if you're working with a sponsor who's paying you on a weekly basis, at worst on a monthly basis, or God forbid on a quarterly basis, where do you think you're going to put your patients if you have choice, right? So absolutely, you get almost 100% opt-in when you're paying someone. So you get 100% opt-in on site payments. You start to build that relationship on behalf of the sponsor, on behalf of Block Clinical, and then you start talking and layering in patient support. It really is a no-brainer. And then wrap it up with reporting and forecasting that ties, just a tremendous amount of spend together. And yeah, I mean, obviously, this is why we've combined these services. This is why Greenfire went out and bought Concierge. This is why there's just a tremendous amount of eyes from the private equity perspective on these companies that are in this space, is they want to wrap these two services together and continually, drive consolidated services for our clients. So
Well, I think that, a big thing too, and they do perk up when you talk about especially the project managers, when you talk about the ability for forecasting and kind of almost a predictive spend modeling type thing, and the ability to reforecast. I think it's one of those things where, we have the ability, with each new patient enrollment, to then have a much better line of sight all the way downstream with all the known cost factors of that patient. And like we said from the very beginning, that the more services that we can pay for via the portal, then the more accurate that forecasting is going to be.
right. So for those out there, let's just say for every dollar Block Clinical makes, we pass through 20. It's a tremendous amount of spend. It's a lot of spend that we can analyze, and we can actually map against visit schedules and actual site enrollment, actual patient enrollment. We can do a great job forecasting that. And then you bring in site payments, you're adding another layer of a lot of spend on these clinical trials, and you've captured, let's just say, half of it. And then the big black hole of CROs. And, we've had clients who've asked us to pay CROs and to help try and forecast, or help them forecast. And the reality is I think that's an obstacle, right? That's something we can all try and work towards, because forecasting for half your study spend, I don't know how efficient that is, right? I mean, it's great, of course, but you're just missing a lot of the big picture. So I think we have a ways to go. Forecasting is something that we know that everybody wants. We're continuously working on our models and trying to figure out the best way, not just to forecast from the beginning. That's pretty easy, but once things get moving, what has been spent, what's left, how do we reforecast that and continue to kind of push that? That's kind of where we're headed. I think everyone's probably working on that, and it's something that's a lot harder in actual application than it is in theory. So I don't know anything else on that.
Well, I think that there's certainly, like I said, with the comp that we have out there, it's a giant pie. There's a lot of people that are still adapting, to the whole concept of this patient focused clinical trial, and going back to that idea that we had on the back of the napkin that day at the bar when we decided this is what we were going to do, and it was we've got a slide for it now, obviously, but it's that whole holistic approach of combining all these things and all the spokes that come off of that, centered around technology and that patient centricity idea. Everything that can go out from that, as far as clinical operations quality, financial transparency, and foresights, and all of the different things that fall under patient satisfaction. It really is, one of those things where I think that if some of the larger companies had a very holistic approach to it and standardized processes around supporting patients, it wouldn't be reinventing the wheel every single time you had to talk to a different therapeutic lead. If it was,
right. So you're talking about strategically creating
yeah,
a program that could support any patient across any trial type in the exact same way, from rare disease to well patient, for large companies, and they can put forth very standardized approaches. You see it across almost anywhere within a business that manages a lot of money and spend. And of course, this is one of them. So And my joke about that is that thing that we created 5 years ago that the industry is actually probably not ready for
It's
another
actually been
10
7
years
years.
from now. So we'll just continue to leave it on the napkin and in our backup slides, because again, until we get more suppliers, more service companies, to your point, really until our business, I'm going to say it becomes more commoditized, where it's like these administrative services of supporting patients is more generalized. We're just not going to get there. You know, clients aren't yet even focused on reducing their spend, right? I mean, you take negotiation with some of these travel suppliers and put that into their travel spend, and now all of a sudden they're getting a few percent back on all this spend. They're covering our services tenfold, right? And they're just not there yet. We know we can get them there, but for us as a small company, I think the reason it's not sellable, right? We can just go sell the service, and that's what we do. But no, I agree with you. I think as soon as we get some of the larger folks to kind of take a bite and want to step back and do things slowly, that's the other thing. You know, some of these big companies look at us as like still too small and scalable and so forth. But the reality is we don't need to turn on every single 300 clinical trials for them overnight. Like we should be working towards a program that supports their future. And unfortunately, that's just not how these guys buy right now. It's like they buy the service, they want it now, and they want it turned on yesterday. And that's a barrier for us. I think we'll overcome here in the next little bit of time.
Well, yeah, you're right. It's the big guys, the conversation sort of stops there. Unless you can eat the entire elephant at once, they're not interested. And so but that's blocking them from being innovative. You know, if we're looking at innovation, I think the big ships turn very slowly, but when it comes to a smaller company that's exceedingly effective, they're not going to be exceedingly effective at turning on every single country in the world right out of the gate, like flipping a switch. I mean, it's got to be a progression.
Unless you have a very generic, simple product that isn't customizable and really fits in a box, right? And that's kind of what we're trying to get out of. Maybe on that note, I did come across, or an email found me in the box that caught my attention. I will share kind of what it links to, but came from a source called Clinical Leader. And what obviously caught my attention was overcoming payment challenges. And then when I zipped into here, this is our world, right? I mean, these are all topics that have to do with patient burden and payments and concierge support. And so, long story short, start opening them up. They're all done by Greenfire, right? Every single one of them talks about sort of a different facet within our market. The content itself's great. It covers basically the story we started telling 14 years ago as we just started talking about it. But my comment earlier is like, here we are still talking about some things that are just super simple. At the same time, there's some, we're pushing people to clean cards and like physical cards, like that's still the only option or the option. Whereas like, what about all these other payment methods that people actually want? We did a survey on LinkedIn the other day, ran it for a week, and it was like, how do you want to get paid if you're a patient? And like 1% of responses was, I want a physical card that you reload money to. Everything else was direct deposit into my bank account, push to debit, PayPal, Venmo. And I get it. There's some absolute need for physical cards in unbanked areas, but there's also different payout methods. There's Cash App, there's Revolut in Europe. There's all these different payment methods that are popping up every single day. And that's the beauty of how we've designed our system, is we can go and integrate any of those companies, right? Our revenue and our model is not based on these suppliers. We just want to bring the suppliers into sort of our integrated marketplace based on what patients and sites are asking for. So it still kind of bugs me that we're designing these solutions around these like old school technologies and old school methods. But the reality is they're out there, they're talking about, why this is all important. I think that's great. Even if clients are hopefully looking for these services, they'll give us a look. And then, really the other thing I'm looking at here is they talk about acquiring concierge. And that's sort of something I've been thinking about, as we are a bootstrapped company, right? We grow based on our revenue. We have no one but ourselves to call to. It's a blessing and a curse, right? We're not at conferences bringing more. Last time I was at a conference, there was a booth next to us, huge, had entertainment. There were more people standing in that booth than we have in our entire company, right? And like, does anyone work around here? I mean, who's paying for all that? Like, seriously, who's paying for all that? I can tell you who's paying for all that. Not their revenue, it's their investors.
Yeah.
And so you've got a Green Fire that bought Clincierge almost 2 years ago, not integrated, right? Like there's still, just it's hard. You got two companies, you're trying to bring them together. And now you've got Green Fire merging with, what is it, Sabota?
Sabota. Yeah.
Sabota. So now that's going to distract them for the next 2 years. And the reality is they're being driven by a fund that either has to divest and do something bigger. So you got to sell a $1 billion company, or you got to go acquire another one because you got to keep the fund going. And so there's just this constant disruption. And, when I step back, I really feel bad for a lot of their clients, right? I mean, if you were a client of Clincierge and now all of a sudden you're swallowed up by Green Fire, your choices back then were Green Fire and Clincierge. And yeah, there were some other players, but the reality is those are your choices. And you went with one because you didn't want to work with the other. And now all of a sudden you're together, and and when you're in that world of like, you're no longer trying to be innovative. You're just trying to work out.
But the whole point to that whole merger really was so they would have this giant integration with the EDC, CTMS, ERT systems, which we're doing now anyway with CRSQ. So, that's not an earth-shattering, mega merger. But we've got two very effective companies that are playing off each other's talents in order to benefit each other, to have a combined offering that brings a lot of efficiency. So when it comes to all of that,
patient support with site payments, we know why it makes a lot of sense. And the EDC comment, we're integrated with tons of EDC companies. I mean, anyone that we can trigger data off of, and anyone that our clients and CROs want to work with, or our sponsors and CROs. Obviously, we work with all of them. We have no vested interest, and we have no, in that sense, like it's really up to them. But anyways, I'm
on that note, before we move on, I know we're kind of closing out here quickly, but the one thing that I always talk to clients about are people that come to the booth and they want to know, kind of, do you want to get key differentiators out there, right? And I haven't heard of anybody else really doing this. When we did the integration with the patient app, the patient goes in, they fill out the survey, they click submit, we operate in the background to auto remit payment to that patient. And no one has to do anything. Patient gets paid within 24 hours, 48 hours of them completing the task, and it shows up on a report. So those types of automated data trigger payments is something that I haven't really heard much about in the industry. And so I think that's something that's unique to us, where that's just an example of what you just mentioned as far as picking up data triggers and doing payment automation. Payment automation is a lot different than just site payments.
Yeah, but I mean, we do that everywhere, right? That's just that is a great example and one thing we can do. But as long as we're reading data, we can trigger anything. We could trigger a ride to get booked, right? If it's you and I in a clinical trial and a visit gets booked, book a lift. No human needed, right? That transaction is cheap. It's small. It's something that clients would pay for in every single trial. If you asked a client, hey, if it was a positive ROI on every visit, would you provide paid for patient support services? The answer is resoundingly yes. But when you have service companies out there trying to charge 4 hours worth of time to book a visit, that only really works for rare disease and oncology and so forth. So yeah, we have to get to integrations with bigger systems. We know we're never going to be the big system. That's why I call us the plumbers. Like, we eventually will sort of fade away and disappear and just be the pipes in the middle that people might not even notice are here. And we also might support other service companies down the road, right? That are better in Europe and that are better in Asia, but you'll at least then have a conduit from a technology platform, and then really what do clients want, forecasting and spend, that wraps everything up in the middle. So without going into it, obviously when we started this company, one of the things we looked at was the corporate travel and meetings world, right? That's a world that operated 20 years ago, just like we operate now. A bunch of siloed companies, a bunch of siloed technologies, to the point where it moved to a point where there was always a broad platform that could manage budgets and manage planning. And then who the service company was, who the one that was actually planning the meeting, it didn't really matter, right? Then at that point in time, corporations had the ability to pick and choose. And you might have a concierge that's amazing in one area and not in others, and you want to use them and you want to use two other companies. Right now, everything kind of goes into one bucket. We hopefully will make a key push into there. So, all right, enough on that. I think we're going to wrap up here. You got another conference coming up. Maybe talk about that a little bit, and then
Sure. Yeah, we got
close episode number 1.
Yeah, it's outsourcing clinical trials, like I said in the beginning, right here in Raleigh, and so it's the Southeast. So got a little bit of a networking event put together for the Monday night, and another one on Tuesday. But it's a diverse crowd. It's CRO heavy because basically Raleigh Research Triangle Park is CRO heavy, but they're looking at the agenda now, and it's technology spotlights. Effective strategies of engaging naive sites to engaging patients, early engagement to maximize sponsor CRO partnerships. So the topics that they're discussing kind of run the gamut, which is great because we've got an audience that runs the gamut. And because it's outsourcing, we have a lot of the procurement people that show up that are, typically the, people that you need to go through at some point in time. So, and they really bring and they focus on what the suppliers are that their companies use. So it's a good audience for us.
So if they're at the conference, they're going to find you by finding your booth, right?
Yeah.
What if they're not at the conference? What if they just want to come to your pre-event?
It's there. You can go to Triangle Bioconnections on LinkedIn, and there's a announcement about it there with the location. I didn't put it on you can also go to bio-connections.com because the Triangle Bioconnections, we also have 3 other chapters now. There's Boston, Bay Area, and Atlanta. And so I've got friends that run the networking events in those locations, but we've got one coming up this Monday. It's at Rally Point Sports Bar. And so it's right across the street from the venue. So anybody that's coming in for OCT that Monday evening, it's very casual. Just kind of come as you are. Once you get your bags unloaded at the hotel, come on over. And there'll be some other local people here. There are some local colleagues that will be attending as well. So that'll kind of get the week started that Monday evening. I
love that. That was really a pet project, and now it's nationwide thing, right? That's something you were working on, this Triangle Bioconnections. What, kind of coming out of COVID, right? I mean,
it was coming out of COVID because everybody needed to get out of the house, especially me. And so it started off small, where we would have 10 to 20 people show up, and then all of a sudden it just became this thing where we've got 100 to 150 people coming to some of the events. And the caveat in the beginning was always that whoever's in the room has to be able to sign a contract to kind of keep the crowd qualified. And it's still pretty much true. It's all the people that can sign contracts, or at least adjacent to those who can. And so it's a great networking opportunity. We do that quarterly. This is a pop-up one just to do in conjunction with the OCT, but Q2 will be announced here shortly.
And every event, there's a different sponsor. So if you're, and I don't mean pharma sponsor, but someone who's vested interest in getting in front of these folks. And so if you're interested in working with Eric and the team to help host these things, reach out.
Our emails are simple. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, but eric@blockclinical.com.
All right, Fred. Well, that was fun. I doubt anyone got to the end here of this first podcast, but kudos to you if you did. We appreciate it, and we'll talk to you soon.
Have a great day.
You too.
Cheers.
Bye.